Title: Poor single mom texted a millionaire CEO by mistake, asking for baby formula money. What happened? Screenplay: In the heart of a city that glittered with promise but often delivered only shadows, Clara sat in the suffocating silence of her tiny apartment. The only sounds were the soft, hungry whimpers of her infant son, Leo, and the relentless drumming of rain against the thin window pane. Midnight had painted the world in shades of blue and grey, mirroring the cold dread that had settled deep in her bones. She looked at the empty can of baby formula on the counter, a stark, metallic symbol of her failure. Every light in the towering skyscrapers outside seemed to mock her, each one a distant star in a galaxy of wealth she could never reach. The weight of being a single mother pressed down on her, a physical force that made it hard to breathe, leaving her feeling utterly and completely alone in a world of millions. With trembling hands, she reached for her old phone, its screen a spiderweb of cracks. It was her last lifeline, her final, desperate gamble. She composed a message, her thumbs fumbling over the small keyboard, each word a painful admission of her struggle. "Hey, it's me," she typed, addressing it to the number she believed belonged to her sister. "I'm so sorry to ask, but I'm out of formula for Leo, and I don't get paid until Friday. Could you possibly spare $20? I'll pay you back, I promise." The words felt heavy with shame, a confession of a battle she was losing. She took a deep, shaky breath, squeezed her eyes shut, and pressed send, launching her prayer into the digital void, hoping it would find a compassionate heart on the other end. Miles away, in a world forged from steel, glass, and ambition, Julian stood at the head of a long, polished boardroom table. The city sprawled beneath him, a glittering carpet of lights viewed from the penthouse of his corporate empire. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and unspoken tension as his team of lawyers and executives waited for his final command. They were on the verge of closing $1 billion merger, a deal that would cement his legacy as a ruthless titan of industry. His face was a mask of cold control, his eyes scanning the contracts with a detached precision that had earned him both a fortune and a reputation for being more machine than man. In this sterile sanctuary of power, human emotion was a liability he had long since discarded. Suddenly, a soft buzz vibrated against the mahogany table. Julian's phone, an object usually as silent and disciplined as he was, lit up with an unknown number. His jaw tightened in annoyance. A distraction at a moment like this was unforgivable. He glanced down, his initial impulse a wave of irritation, ready to dismiss the message as spam or a wrong number. His finger hovered over the screen, prepared to block the sender and erase this minor inconvenience from his perfectly curated world. The message was short, a plea from a stranger, a ghost in his machine. It was nothing to him. Just another piece of digital noise in a city overflowing with desperation he had trained himself to ignore. But as he was about to swipe the message away, the raw, unfiltered honesty of the words caught his eye. "I need formula for my baby." It was a simple sentence, devoid of the calculated flattery and strategic jargon that filled his daily life. It was a cry for help from a world he had long forgotten existed, a world of struggle and vulnerability. The plea was so stark, so fundamentally human, that it pierced through the armor he had spent years building around his heart. For a fleeting moment, the cold CEO vanished, replaced by a man staring at a desperate mother's plea. He didn't know it yet, but this single, misplaced text was not an interruption. It was an intersection with a destiny he never knew was waiting. The room held its breath, the silence punctuated only by the distant wail of a siren weaving through the city's concrete canyons. Julian's executives watched him, their faces a mixture of confusion and impatience. The billion-dollar merger, the crowning achievement of his career, lay waiting for his signature. But Julian's gaze was fixed on the phone in his hand, the small screen glowing with a plea so simple and raw it felt like a foreign language. The words, "I need formula for my baby," echoed in the sterile quiet of the boardroom, a stark contrast to the complex legal jargon and aggressive financial projections that defined his reality. For the first time in years, a crack appeared in his meticulously constructed armor, a tremor of an old, forgotten humanity stirring within the cold, calculating machine he had become. One of his senior lawyers, a man named Peterson, whose loyalty was measured in billable hours, cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense atmosphere. "Sir, the final clause. We're ready for your authorization." The question was a gentle nudge back to the world that mattered, the world of profit margins and hostile takeovers. Julian felt a powerful magnetic pull from both directions. On one side, the life he had built, a kingdom of glass and steel where emotion was a fatal flaw. On the other, a desperate, anonymous cry from the darkness, a simple human need that demanded a response. To ignore it was the smart move, the only logical choice. But logic suddenly felt like a hollow, empty vessel, insufficient to contain the strange, burgeoning feeling in his chest. In a move that sent a ripple of shock through the room, Julian pushed the heavy stack of contracts away from him. The papers slid across the polished mahogany, their rustle a sound of defiance against the monumental deal they represented. He knew the cost of this hesitation. In his world, a moment of distraction was a weakness to be exploited, an opening for rivals to strike. Yet, the abstract concept of $1 billion suddenly felt insignificant, a meaningless string of zeros compared to the tangible, gut-wrenching image of a mother unable to feed her child. He was acting on an impulse he couldn't explain, a whisper from a part of himself he thought he had successfully silenced long ago, a conscience he had buried under layers of wealth and ambition. His fingers, which could sign away fortunes without a tremor, now moved with a deliberate, almost sacred slowness across his phone's screen. He opened his personal banking application, the portal to his immense wealth, and initiated a transfer. He didn't send the $20 she had asked for. That felt like an insult, a pittance. Instead, he typed in a figure that would provide a cushion, a brief respite from the relentless pressure of poverty. It was an anonymous act of rebellion, a quiet protest against the cold, unfeeling man staring back at him from the reflective glass of the penthouse window. He pressed the confirmation button, sending a lifeline into the digital unknown, a gesture of grace to a complete stranger whose path had inexplicably crossed his own. After the transfer was confirmed, he composed a short, simple reply to the unknown number. "Help has been sent. Please take care of your child. No repayment is necessary." He then deleted the entire message thread, a reflexive attempt to sever the connection, to return to his orderly, detached world. He stood up and faced his bewildered team, his expression once again a carefully constructed mask of command. "We'll resume in 10 minutes, he announced, his voice betraying none of the inner turmoil. As he walked toward the vast window overlooking the city, a profound and unsettling question took root in his mind. Who was this person on the other end of his impulsive act of charity, and what had he just unleashed into both of their lives? Clara stared at the notification from her bank, her breath catching in her throat. The amount deposited was not $20. It was a sum so significant it felt like a clerical error, a dream from which she would soon wake. For a long moment, the world fell away, replaced by a dizzying sense of disbelief and overwhelming relief. Tears streamed down her face, not of sorrow, but of a profound, earth-shattering gratitude. She rushed to the crib and lifted Leo, holding him close as she sobbed into his soft hair. The money was a lifeline, a miracle delivered from an unknown angel. It meant food, security, and a precious, priceless moment of peace. It was more than just currency. It was a breath of air after being held underwater for too long, a whisper in the darkness that told her she was not forgotten. When another message from the unknown number arrived later that day, her heart hammered against her ribs. She half expected it to be a retraction, a cold message explaining the mistake. Instead, the words on the screen were simple and unexpectedly gentle. "I just wanted to make sure you and your son have everything you need." The sincerity of the question, the lack of any demand or expectation, disarmed her completely. This was not a transaction, it was an act of pure, unadulterated kindness. With trembling fingers, she began to type a reply, not just a simple thank you, but a genuine outpouring of her soul. She described the relief she felt, the way she could finally buy not just formulae, but also fresh fruit and a warm blanket for the coming cold. Julian read her reply in the sterile silence of his penthouse apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. Her words painted a vivid picture of a life so different from his own. A life where a warm blanket was a luxury and a full pantry was a cause for celebration. She told him about Leo's first real smile, a gummy, joyful expression that had appeared that very morning, as if he could sense his mother's newfound peace. Julian found himself smiling too, a real, unforced expression that felt foreign on his face. He had orchestrated billion-dollar acquisitions that felt less impactful than this one small act. For the first time, he felt the true weight of his wealth, not as a measure of power, but as a tool for creating tangible joy in a world he had long since stopped seeing. Their anonymous correspondence became a quiet ritual over the following days. He was drawn to her resilience, to the simple, unvarnished way she described her world. She never asked for more, only sharing small details of her life, as if speaking to a trusted friend. She spoke of her dream of being a graphic designer, a passion she had set aside to survive. He, in turn, found himself offering advice, not as a CEO, but as a mentor, suggesting online courses and platforms where she could showcase her talent. He never revealed who he was, and she never asked. In the anonymity of their digital conversations, they were stripped of their worldly statuses, connecting on a purely human level. Two lonely souls, finding a surprising and comforting warmth in the cold glow of their phone screens. One evening, as the rain once again tapped against her window, Clara felt comfortable enough to share a deeper part of her story. She wrote about her late husband, a brilliant engineer who had worked tirelessly for a promising tech startup, a man full of hope and innovative ideas. She explained that his company had been unexpectedly bought out in a hostile takeover by a massive, faceless corporation. The new management had shattered his dreams, and the stress, she believed, had contributed to the sudden heart attack that took his life. A cold dread washed over Julian as he read her words. He felt a chilling premonition, a sense of a terrible, intersecting fate. With a hesitation that felt like stone in his thumbs, he typed back a single, crucial question. What was the name of the company? Clara's fingers hovered over the keyboard, a fresh wave of grief washing over her as she prepared to type the name. It felt like reopening a wound that had only just begun to scar over. Each letter was a ghost. A memory of her husband, David, working late into the night, his face illuminated by the glow of his monitor, his eyes bright with passion for the work he was doing. He had poured his entire soul into that company, believing he was building a better future, not just for his family, but for the world. The name represented all of that lost hope, all of that stolen potential, with a deep, shuddering breath that felt torn from her very lungs. She finally typed it out and hit send. It was called Nexus Dynamics. They were on the verge of a breakthrough when it all came crashing down. The two words, Nexus Dynamics, hit Julian with the force of a physical impact. The phone felt suddenly heavy in his hand, a cold, dead weight. The air in his penthouse, usually so pristine and controlled, seemed to thicken, suffocating him. He felt a dizzying lurch in his stomach, as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. Nexus Dynamics. It wasn't just a company he had acquired, it was the acquisition that had defined his reputation for ruthless efficiency. He remembered the deal with chilling clarity, a strategic, hostile takeover designed to absorb their groundbreaking patents and dismantle the rest. It had been celebrated in the financial press as one of his most brilliant and merciless victories. Now, that victory had a face, a widow and an orphan, and their silent suffering echoed in the gilded cage he had built for himself. He was thrown back in time, not by choice, but by the sheer force of his dawning horror. He saw himself in a colder, sharper boardroom 5 years prior, his voice cutting through the air with detached authority. He remembered dismissing the concerns about the Nexus team, referring to their passionate founder, a man whose name he never bothered to learn, as an unavoidable casualty of progress. The human element had been nothing more than a variable in a complex equation of profit and loss, a minor obstacle to be swept aside in his relentless climb to the top. The memory was coated in the bitter taste of ambition, a younger version of himself so blinded by the pursuit of power that he had failed to see the lives he was trampling under his feet. He had signed the papers without a second thought, extinguishing a dream he never took the time to understand. Returning to the present, the glittering city lights outside his window no longer looked like a kingdom at his command, but like a million accusing eyes staring back at him. The anonymous kindness he had shown Clara was no longer an act of charity. It was a grotesque and insufficient penance for a crime he hadn't even known he'd committed. He was the faceless corporation. He was the source of the stress and heartbreak that had stolen her husband and left her in this desperate situation. The money he had sent, which had felt like a grand gesture of his humanity, now seemed like a pittance, a hollow attempt to patch a wound he himself had inflicted. The weight of this secret was immense, a crushing burden that threatened to shatter the very foundation of the man he thought he was. He looked down at his phone, at the trusting, grateful messages from the woman whose life he had unknowingly ruined. The digital connection that had felt so pure and redemptive was now a monument to a terrible, unspoken lie. How could he continue this correspondence, offering comfort and advice, while hiding the monstrous truth of his identity? To confess would be to destroy her all over again, twisting her image of a kind stranger into the face of her deepest tragedy. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, caught between a devastating truth and a compassionate lie. He felt an overwhelming urge to erase everything, to run from the ghost he had created. But what he didn't know is that fate was not finished with him yet, and his past was about to collide with his present in a way he could never escape. Driven by a guilt that felt like a physical weight, Julian knew he could not simply continue their anonymous correspondence while harboring such a devastating secret. Confession was unthinkable. It would only inflict a new, more profound trauma upon Clara. Instead, he chose a path of silent atonement. He would give her back the future that he had stolen. Using his vast network, he orchestrated a prime graphic design position to open up within his own corporation, Vance Industries. He then sent a carefully worded message to Clara, explaining that a friend of his was deeply impressed with her portfolio and wanted to offer her an interview. He presented it as a stroke of luck, a door opened by her mysterious benefactor, meticulously erasing his own name from the equation. It was a dangerous gamble, a desperate attempt to build a new life for her on the ruins of the one he had destroyed. Clara's world erupted in a supernova of joy and disbelief. An interview, not just any interview, but one at a major corporation in the heart of the city's financial district. It felt like a fantasy, a far-fetched dream materializing from the digital ether. She threw herself into preparations, borrowing a smart blazer from a neighbor and staying up all night polishing her portfolio until every design shone with potential. The morning of the interview, She stood before her cracked mirror, but for the first time in years, she didn't see a woman defined by loss and struggle. She saw a designer, a professional, a mother fighting her way back. Her heart swelled with an overwhelming gratitude for the kind stranger who had not only saved her from desperation, but was now single-handedly resurrecting her long-abandoned dreams. She walked out the door with a newfound confidence, stepping toward a future that suddenly seemed bright with promise. The lobby of Vance Industries was a cathedral of corporate power. Sunlight streamed through two-story glass walls, glinting off polished marble floors and brushed steel accents. The air itself seemed to hum with ambition and quiet, immense wealth. It was the world David had dreamed of conquering, and for a moment a pang of sorrow pierced through her excitement. After giving her name to the receptionist, she was guided to a private elevator that ascended with a silent, breathtaking speed. With each floor, the pressure built in her ears, a physical manifestation of the nervous energy coursing through her veins. She clutched her portfolio like a shield, her knuckles white. This was more than a job interview. It was a gateway to a different life, a chance to provide Leo with a security she had never known, all thanks to the inexplicable kindness of her anonymous friend. She was led to a plush waiting area on the top floor, a space clearly designed to communicate power. The panoramic view of the city was dizzying, a god's-eye perspective that made her feel impossibly small. Her gaze wandered across the tastefully decorated walls, landing on a large, framed magazine cover. It was from Forbes, the headline bold and aggressive, "The Unstoppable Julian Vance. How a Ruthless Visionary Conquered the Tech World." The man on the cover stared out with an expression of cool, calculating intelligence. His face was a thunderclap of recognition. It was the face from the profile picture her benefactor had recently updated. Beneath the powerful image, a caption detailed his greatest triumph: the strategic, hostile acquisition and dismantling of a promising startup named Nexus Dynamics. The portfolio in her lap suddenly felt like it was made of lead. In an instant, the air was stolen from her lungs. The silent, opulent room began to spin, the city lights blurring into streaks of cruel, mocking light. Every kind word, every piece of advice, every dollar sent was not an act of compassion, but a product of a guilty conscience. The man who had presented himself as her savior was, in fact, the architect of her ruin. He was the faceless corporation, the source of the stress that had broken her husband's heart. The job interview was not a gift. It was a pathetic, twisted attempt at absolution. A wave of nausea and betrayal washed over her, so powerful it threatened to bring her to her knees. Just then, the heavy office door swung open. Julian Vance stepped out, his face arranged in a welcoming smile that instantly vanished as he met her eyes, and saw not hope, but the horrifying dawn of recognition. The silence in the opulent office was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Clara's shock hardened into a glacial fury, a cold fire that burned away her tears before they could form. Her gaze was a physical force, pinning Julian in place, stripping him of his power and exposing the man beneath the billion-dollar armor. He saw everything in her eyes, the raw wound of betrayal, the ghost of her husband's broken dreams, and the bitter taste of a hope that had been poisoned at its source. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer an explanation that felt utterly inadequate, but no sound emerged. In that stretched, agonizing moment, the portfolio slipped from her numb fingers, spilling her designs across the polished marble floor. The colorful pages, filled with her resurrected ambitions, lay scattered between them like the wreckage of a beautiful lie, a testament to the future he had built for her on a foundation of ruin. Finally, her voice emerged, not with the warmth he had grown accustomed to through their messages, but with a sharp, brittle edge that could cut glass. "Was this all a game to you?" she asked, her tone devoid of emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than rage. Some twisted charity project to ease your conscience? She didn't wait for an answer, already knowing that any explanation would be an insult. She knelt, her movements stiff and deliberate, and began gathering her scattered work, her back turned to him in a gesture of absolute dismissal. Each design she picked up felt tainted, a product of his guilt. "I don't want your job," she stated, her voice trembling with suppressed pain. "I don't want your help. I want nothing from the man who destroyed my husband and then had the audacity to play savior." The words hung in the air, a final, devastating verdict on his character. Julian felt a desperate urge to make her understand, to somehow rewind time to before she saw his face on that magazine cover. "Clara, please," he began, his voice sounding foreign and weak in his own ears. "When you first messaged me, I had no idea. I didn't know who you were, who your husband was. The help I offered was real. It had nothing to do with Nexus dynamics." He took a step toward her, but she flinched, and he froze. "When I found out, I wanted to fix it. I thought this job, this opportunity, was a way to give back what I had taken." But as he spoke, he heard the hollowness of his own words. His attempt at atonement sounded like a powerful man's arrogant attempt to buy his way out of a moral debt, a clumsy, self-serving gesture that only deepened the wound he was trying to heal. She stood up, her portfolio clutched to her chest like a shield, her face a mask of profound, unbreachable sorrow. "You don't get to fix this," she whispered, her voice cracking with the weight of her disillusionment. "Well, the worst part isn't what you did to David's company. The worst part is that you let me believe in a stranger's kindness. You let me open up my heart and share my hopes with the very person responsible for my darkest days. You made me grateful to my own monster." Her words were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact, a truth so devastating it left no room for argument or apology. Without another glance, she turned and walked toward the elevator, each step an echo of finality, leaving him utterly alone in the gilded cage he had built for himself, a king with a shattered conscience. Julian watched the elevator doors slide shut, the quiet hiss sounding like a final exhalation, sealing him inside his solitude. The vast, sunlit office, once a symbol of his dominion, now felt like a mausoleum for a connection he had accidentally found and deliberately destroyed. He was left with nothing but the deafening silence and the ghost of her final words, which replayed in his mind with brutal clarity. He had tried to be a better man, to use his immense power for something good, but his past was a debt that could not be repaid with money or opportunity. He had offered her a future, but she had rejected it, choosing her pride and her pain over his guilty repentance. As he stood there, paralyzed by the enormity of his failure, he was faced with a chilling question. Had his one act of humanity just caused more destruction than all his years of ruthless ambition? For days, Julian remained a ghost in his own life, the polished surfaces of his penthouse reflecting a man he no longer recognized. The silence left by Clara's departure was more profound than any market crash. He finally understood that his attempt to fix her life was just another power play, a transaction designed to absolve his guilt. True reparation required sacrifice, not just of money, but of ego. He picked up the phone and called his legal team, his voice calm and resolute. He instructed them to begin the process of publicly acknowledging the intellectual property of Nexus Dynamics and to establish a multi-million-dollar innovation grant in the name of its founder, David Miller. It wasn't an offer to Clara. It was a public correction of his legacy, a selfless act of atonement meant to restore the honor of the man whose life he had inadvertently shattered. Clara was trying to bury the memory, forcing herself to focus on Leo, on finding any small job to keep them afloat. The hope Julian had ignited had been so bright that its absence left the world feeling colder and darker than before. One morning, as she scrolled through a news feed on her phone, a headline stopped her cold. Vance Industries honors late tech visionary David Miller. Her breath hitched. She clicked the article, her eyes scanning the text with disbelief. It detailed the creation of a major grant for young entrepreneurs, established in David's name. The article included a direct quote from Julian Vance, who publicly stated that the acquisition of Nexus Dynamics was a failure to recognize the profound human capital, and that David Miller's vision was one his company would now strive to champion. It was a stunning public admission of fault, an act that restored her husband's name in the brightest possible light. The article did what no private apology ever could. It separated the act from the man. The job offer had been a gesture tainted by personal guilt, a secret between the two of them. This, however, was a public declaration of her husband's worth, a testament to his stolen legacy for the entire world to see. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but they were not tears of anger or betrayal. They were tears of catharsis, of a deep, aching wound finally being cleansed. Julian hadn't tried to buy her forgiveness. He had earned it by giving her husband back the honor that had been stripped from him. In this grand, selfless gesture, she saw not the ruthless CEO from the magazine cover, but the conflicted, kind stranger from the text messages, a man truly trying to repair the damage he had caused, no matter the cost to his own reputation. With a resolve she hadn't felt in years, Clara walked back into the lobby of Vance Industries. She didn't have an appointment, but she stated her name with a newfound confidence. When she was shown into Julian's office, he stood waiting, his expression stripped of all authority, leaving only a vulnerable man awaiting a verdict. The air was still, heavy with unspoken words. "I saw the news," she began, her voice soft but clear. "About the grant, about David." She paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "You didn't have to do that." Julian finally met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a profound sadness. "Yes, I did," he replied, his voice raspy with emotion. "It was the only right thing to do. I took his future. The least I could do is honor his past." In his confession, Clara saw the complete transformation of the man before her. He was no longer hiding behind his wealth or power. He was laying his conscience bare. A fragile understanding began to form between them, built not on the lie that had connected them, but on the difficult truth that had torn them apart and was now, slowly, bringing them back together. "Thank you," she said, the words carrying the weight of genuine forgiveness, for giving him back his name. He then made her a new offer, not a job out of pity, but a position as a director on the board of the new foundation, allowing her to personally shepherd her husband's legacy. It was a chance to build something new and hopeful from the wreckage of the past, a partnership founded not on a mistake, but on a shared commitment to redemption. The city no longer felt like a place of glittering indifference. For Clara, the morning sun now streamed through the large windows of a new apartment, a space filled not with the scent of fear, but with the aroma of fresh coffee and the joyful babble of a healthy growing Leo. Her days were no longer a desperate scramble for survival, but a steady rhythm of purpose. As a director of the David Miller Innovation Foundation, she spent her time nurturing the very kind of dreams that had once animated her husband, guiding young visionaries and ensuring his legacy was one of creation, not destruction. The cracked phone that had once been her last resort now sat on a polished desk, a humble relic of a prayer that had been answered in a way she could never have imagined, a reminder that the darkest night often precedes the most brilliant dawn. Julian, too, had discovered a new kind of currency. The cold satisfaction of a corporate takeover had been replaced by the profound warmth of seeing a scholarship recipient's face light up, or reading a progress report from a project funded by the foundation. He and Clara worked side by side, not as benefactor and beneficiary, but as equals, their partnership a quiet testament to the power of redemption. Their meetings were filled with collaborative energy, a fusion of his strategic mind and her compassionate insight. He had traded his armor for authenticity, his detachment for a deep, abiding connection to the human impact of his work. In her, he saw the face of the world he had once ignored, and through their shared mission, he was not just honoring her husband's past. He was actively building himself a more meaningful future. It's a strange and beautiful truth of the universe that sometimes the most profound detours lead us exactly where we need to be. What begins as a mistake, a single misplaced digit in an ocean of digital noise, can become a lifeline that pulls two disparate souls from the wreckage of their own isolation. For Julian and Clara, a wrong number was not a simple error. It was destiny's intervention, a course correction from a higher plane. Their journey is a powerful reminder that the most important messages are often the ones we are not expecting, and they arrive not with a formal announcement, but as a quiet whisper from a stranger. It teaches us that a single moment of attention, a choice to see the human behind the interruption, can rewrite not just one life, but two. How many invisible threads connect us to strangers every single day? How many quiet pleas for help float past us, dismissed as digital static in our busy lives? The world is full of wrong numbers, of missed connections and messages left unread. Yet, within each of them lies a potential for grace, a chance to be the unexpected answer to someone's prayer. It is a call to listen a little more closely, to look beyond the surface of an inconvenience and see the possibility of a shared humanity waiting to be acknowledged. If this story of an accidental text and the powerful redemption it sparked has touched your heart, consider sharing it as a reminder that kindness is never wasted and that sometimes the greatest wealth we can offer is simply our attention. One crisp autumn afternoon, they stood together on a university campus, the golden sunlight filtering through the leaves of ancient oak trees. Before them, a new technology lab, the first major project of the foundation, was being dedicated. A toddler-aged Leo, holding tightly to his mother's hand, pointed with wonder at the gleaming glass building bearing his father's name. Julian knelt down, not as a CEO, but simply as a man, and smiled at the boy, a genuine, unguarded expression of peace. Clara looked from her son to Julian, her eyes filled with a quiet, profound gratitude that transcended words. In that shared glance, there was no trace of the past's pain, only the peaceful, luminous glow of a new beginning. A testament to the fact that even the most broken things can be rebuilt into something strong and beautiful.